Daf Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph, 5 lines from the top. Lema Abai v'Rava beplukta the Rav Shmuel kamifagri. We just learned previously that Rav and Shmuel, they had a machlokes that do we say pi tikra yed v'saisem even when there are no actual physical walls. According to Rav, even if it's wide open, you have an achsadra that you have a babika, an achsadra that's a pavilion that has a roof but has no walls whatsoever. It's in an open area. Rav says, nevertheless, we say pi tikra yed v'saisem. Shmuel says, even though we have a halacha, pi tikra yed v'saisem, but it only applies when you have at least one physical wall. So let's say the following machlokes between Abai and Rava, they're arguing with the same machlokes as Rav and Shmuel. If he is misachech on achsadra that has posts along the side, around the perimeter, it has posts. So on the top of the achsadra, it just had beams, and then he puts chach on top of it. Now, but you need, for a sukkah, you also need walls. So if there are vertical posts, there are posts along the sides, and the posts are within 3 tefachim of each other. If the posts are within 3 tefachim of each other, we can say lovud, and therefore halachically it's considered to be walls. So if but if it doesn't have the posts, or the posts are more than 3 tefachim apart, Abai Amar Kshera, Abai says, nevertheless, the sukkah is kosher. Rava Amar Psula, and Rava says it's possible. Abai Amar Kshera, because he says, even though if you don't have the posts, nevertheless, you still have walls, because Amar Pitikra Yed V'Saisem, because you have the edge of the roof, the edges of the beams, then we say Pitikra Yed V'Saisem, so therefore it's considered to be walls. Meaning the achsadra, the pavilion, has a frame around it. You're putting the schach on the frame, but it has the frame, so it has the edge of the beam on the achsadra, so you'd say Pitikra Yed V'Saisem. So even if you don't have the posts, even if you don't have the psimim, nevertheless, it's still kosher because you have Pitikra Yed V'Saisem. So it therefore encloses the pavilion, and now you have walls, and you have the walls of the sukkah. Rava says it's possible, and Rava says you don't say Pitikra Yed V'Saisem. Lema Abai Karav. Let's say Abai is going according to Rav, that even though you have no physical walls, still you can say Pitikra Yed V'Saisem, even though it's on all 4 sides, it's enclosing the entire area. And we would still say Pitikra Yed V'Saisem, and therefore you have Tfanas of the Sukkah. And we would say V'Rava Kishmuel, and Rava holds like Shmuel, that says in this case you cannot say Pitikra Yed V'Saisem, because in this case we have no physical walls, so he holds like Shmuel, and therefore we won't say Pitikra Yed V'Saisem. Where says no, not necessarily. I'll leave it to Shmuel Kol Yamalei Pligi. I'll tell you, according to Shmuel, everyone will agree that this would not be kosher because you have no physical wall. Ki pligi alib the Rab. This machlokes over here, they're arguing in the shlit of Rab. In the shlit of Rab, would Rab say is kosher? Abai kirav. Abai, we readily understand that he goes like Rab. He'd say Pitikra Yed V'Saisem, even though it's on all 4 sides. Rava says, even though Rav said that over there, by Achsadra Bebika, he said that it's called that it can be metaltal, because over there you can say Pitikra Yed V'Saisem on 4 sides, because these beams that were around the edges of the Achsadra were made for the Achsadra. They were made for the purpose of the achsadra, so we can say, well, it was made for this purpose. It extends down. It extends further down. But over here, the beams on the edge of the achsadra were not made for a sukkah. Now you want to transform this. You want to turn this into a sukkah. Well, this was not made. These were not made for a sukkah. Now, as Rashi explains, even though the mechitzas don't have to be l'shma, but over here, it's not that the mechitzas have to be made l'shem sukkah, But the mechitzas over here, the beams, the edge of the beams, were made not for a sukkah. They were made for an achsadra. So now transform this and extend it and say that the pitikra yered v'saisim to create walls of a sukkah, he holds that we would not say it in this case. So really, we don't have to say that they're arguing in the machlokes Rav and Shmuel. They're arguing, even according to Rav, would we say pitikra in such a case where it was not made, where the beams were not made for the sukkah. The Gemara continues like Rabbi Yossi Omer Imutarim. So we learned in the Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda said that if it was kosher, if you had an enclosure on the onset of Shabbos, even though there was a breach during the Shabbos, you can continue carrying for the rest of the Shabbos. Rabbi Yossi said we can't distinguish between and differentiate between this Shabbos and future Shabbos. If we're going to say that this Shabbos is mutter, then it's mutter in the future as well. And if it's now not in mutter in the future, it's not mutter for the Shabbos either. So Rabbi Yossi Omer im mutarim iboy lehu Rabbi Yossi le'esor or lahatim. What does Rabbi Yossi mean to say? Rabbi Yehuda differentiates between the Shabbos. He says the Shabbos is mutter, future Shabbos are also. Rabbi Yossi says you cannot differentiate. So what does he mean to say? It means that it's all mutter or it's all asur. Amar of Sheishis le'esor. What he means to say that it's asur. That it's also. Rabbi Yehuda differentiates and says if it was kosher on the onset of Shabbos, then it remains kosher for this Shabbos. For the future, then it's awesome. But this Shabbos, it's mutter. Rabbi Yossi says you cannot differentiate. So therefore, for the future, it's also. This Shabbos is also, even though it was enclosed on the onset of Shabbos and it was mutter when Shabbos came in. But when you had a breach, now, from that point on, even on this Shabbos, it's also Tanya Namachi. Amar Rabbi Yossi, Geshem Shasrim Lavoy. Just like you say that in the future Shabbos, it's also to carry Kachasurim Le'oisei Shabbos. For this Shabbos, it's it's also. Itma Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef Amar Halach Rabbi Yossi. That's the Halach of Shmuel Amar Halach Rabbi Yehuda. Shmuel says no, the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, and it is mutter for this Shabbos. Umi Amar Shmuel Hachi. Did Shmuel say this? Tonight we learned in the Mishnah Amar Rabbi Yehuda B'med Dvarim Amor. Where do we say that you have to get consent from a person to make an error for him? That is Berev Tchumim. That is when you're making a tchum. Aval be'eruve chatzeros. But if you're talking about eruve chatzeros, marvin ben ladas ben shloi ladas. You can make the error for him on his behalf, with or without his consent. Lefi shezach and ladim shloi b'fanav. Because you can do something with his chus, you can do it even though it's not in front of him, even in his absence, you can do it for him, because it's his chus for him, and we know that that's what he wants, and he would be happy with this. But vein chav ben shloi b'fanav. But you cannot do something which is a chayiv, which is a disadvantage for him. You can't do it without his consent. So therefore, by tchumim, it's not necessarily a schus for a person to make a tchum for him in one direction, because whatever tchum you're going to make for him in one direction, he'll be losing out in the other direction. So it's not unequivocally a schus. It could be a chayiv. And therefore, you need his consent in order to make his tchum in one direction, somewhere over there. Maybe he would rather it here. You need his consent. By Eruv Chatzeres, it's kulay schus. It's a clear benefit. It's only a gain. It's a win-win. The person with the being mishtatif in the Eruv, now he can carry, and others can carry. There's no loss on it. It's a benefit. It's a clear-cut benefit. So therefore, you don't need a prior consent. So therefore, we machalek, and we say, Rabbi Yehuda says, why do you need consent? That's by Eruv Tchumim, but not by Eruv Chatzeres. V'amar Rav Yirmiyah Shmuel halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda, and Shmuel says that this is the halacha like Rabbi Yehuda. V'lo yoid el kol makom sheshana Rabbi Yehuda be'eruvin. And not only that, not only over here do we say the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, but whatever Rabbi Yehuda taught us halacha and eruvin, halacha kamaisa, that is the halacha. V'amar le Rav Chana bar Yehuda Rabbi Yehuda said, Amar Shmuel, did Shmuel say this, that halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, afilu b'mavi shenidlu kairos alachayev, even a case of mavi that where the lechi or the kair was removed during the Shabbos, meaning our type of a case here, where on the onset of Shabbos, it was kosher that you're allowed to carry. And then during the Shabbos, there was a breach. Did Shmuel say the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, even in this case? No, not in this case. I said it by Eruvin, by Eruvin, by Reva Chatzeres, but not by mechitzas. So doesn't that show you that in our case over here, by the case of mechitzas, that Shmuel says the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda? Amar Rav Anan, the Didim of Shmuel. He said, no, Shmuel explained to me, it was explained to me by Shmuel, Kanshin if it's a karmas. Where do we say Shmuel says the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, that it remains kosher for this Shabbos even though there was a breach? That's where it was open into a karmelis. There we say that we're mekel, because even if he makes a mistake and he carries, it's not a deraisa. But where we say that the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda, and it's not mutter for this Shabbos, that's when it was breached and opened into Rishus HaRabim. So the consequences are more severe there. If he forgets and he carries, he'll come to carry into Rishus HaRabim, which is a deraisa. Over there, we do not allow it for this Shabbos. But in the case where it's open to a karmelis, we do paskin, Shmuel does paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. Zok the Mishnah, Habayna Ali al Gabi Shnei Batim, if you have two houses, and two houses on each side of the street, and you build a second story on top of them. So therefore, what you have in effect is you have the houses, you have a roof on top of them, so, and then you have the Rishus HaRabim that passes underneath. So, or if you have a bridge that goes over the Rishus HaRabim, an overpass, so the Rishus HaRabim runs under the bridge. So in these cases over here, you have a roof over the Rishus HaRabim. So metaltum tachteim b'Shabbos, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says the area under the overpass, the area under the aliyah, that is not considered to be Rishus HaRabim. And even though the street passes through, but since it has that overpass, it's not considered to be Rishus HaRabim, and you could be metalfel, you can carry underneath it. So you can carry underneath the bridge, or underneath the aliyah. We'll see in the Gemara why. But Chacham say you can't. If you have a movi that's mefulish, that it's open on both ends to the Rishus HaRabim. So you have the side street, it's open on both ends to the Rishus HaRabim. You can make an Eruv. You can make an Eruv for it, even though it only has the two walls. You put a lechi and kaira at each opening, and then you can carry in that movi. But Chachamim, Oisrim, the Chacham say you cannot. So see in the Gemara what are the svars over here. Amar Rabba, Zog the Gemara, Amar Rabba, Leitema Haino time of the Rabbi Yehuda. Don't say that the reason Rabbi Yehuda is that you can carry under the bridge is Mishum the Kasar Beis Mechitzas Daraisa, because he holds that it's two Mechitzas are a Daraisa. Meaning, if you have a houses on each side, and then you have so you have walls on each side, and you have the second story over it, or you have a bridge over it, then you can carry because you have two mechitzas. And perhaps you'll say that Rabbi Yehuda holds, well, if you have two mechitzas, that's sufficient. Therefore, it's considered a Rishus HaYachid D'Oraisa. And therefore, all you need to do is to be misaken it with a lechi or kaira, or if you have a movi, you can be misaken it with a lechi or kaira. And therefore, you have two mechitzas, and that's sufficient. He says, no. It's rather because we say, and therefore, you have an enclosure on four sides. Because you have the top of, you have the roof, and the bridge, and you have pitikra yard v'saisim. So if you have the two mechitzas over here, if you have a house on each end, and and then you have two mechitzas, and then you have on top you have the aliyah. So now we say the edge of the aliyah is very decisive, and you have four sides. You have an enclosure on four sides. So he says that is the reasoning in the Mishnah. That's why it's mutter in the Mishnah. On the ratio of the Mishnah, it's because of the halacha b'tikra yored v'seisim. Now we'll see shortly in the Gemara where that makes enough kamina, if it's shtei mechitzas or if you hold because it's b'tikra yored v'seisim. Esei Abaye v'aseh as a kasha. Yes, I can't remember Rav Yehuda says even more than that. Mishayesh l'shnei batim b'shnei tzidei rishus harabim. If a person has two houses on two rishus harabim, oisa lechem mikan v'lechem mikan, karam mikan v'karam mikan v'noisen b'amsa. If he has a house on two ends of the rishus harabim, so he has there's two walls, so then all he has to do is make a lechi or kaira at each end that's open to the rishus harabim, and then he can carry in that area. And over here, there's no pitikra yarvisaisim. We're not talking over here where there's an overpass. There's no bridge or a li over here, and yet it's mutter. So doesn't that show you because it's because of shtei mechitzas are deraisa? So Amruloidan and the Chacham said, Ein mar rishus haram b'kach. And the Chacham say, no, you can't rely on this. There's only two partitions here. You can't rely on that. Amrle me'ahi in, he said, from there you can prove that's what he holds. That to mechitzas but mahal like lamashmene. But from the ratio of our Mishnah, you cannot be medayik from the ratio of our Mishnah. From the ratio of the Mishnah, you would say it's because of pitikra yared v'seisim. And that's the reason that it would be mutter, because of pitikra yared v'seisim. And Omar Rashi says, Masis and Namidika, it's meduyik from our Mishnah that it's because of pitikra yared v'seisim. Midiktani, v'oid Omar Rav Yehuda says, additionally he said, Ma'arvin b'mavam afulash, you can make an area with a mavi and a foolish, with a mavi that's open on each end. Now, if you hold that the reason for the ratio that it's mutter is because pitikra yared v'seisim, that's why it's mutter in the ratio, because you have the overpass, you have the aliyah, and you say the edge of it comes down and it encloses that. I understand why we introduced this new case of a moving of foolish, because in the case of moving of foolish, you don't have an overpass, you don't have a roof on top, you don't have an edge of it to say pitikra yared v'seisim. So I understand why this new case is introduced. But if you would say that the reason is because we would hold shtei mechitzas deraisa, that's the svara in the reisha that's the svara. My void. So what is the purpose? What is being gained by this new case of the moving of foolish? What is being brought to our understanding that we don't know before? If you tell me that the Reisha is talking, the reason for the heter is pitikra yared v'seisim, I understand. Now the Oid is telling me, and additionally, Rav Yehuda holds that shtei mechitzas are deraisa. But otherwise, why is this brought in? Shema mina. Then we see that's Rab is correct, that the svara in the Reisha is pitikra yared v'seisim. So what comes out from here? So we're saying, according to Rav Yehuda, he holds that midaraisa, two mechitzas are enough. To make a rishus yachid, two mechitzas are enough in the midaraisa to be treated as a rishus yachid. He also holds pitikra yared v'seisim. Why? What's the point over here? Why do we have these two cases? No, but the point is as follows. If you hold it's pitikra yared v'seisim, that means you have an enclosure on four sides. You're completely enclosed. So that is a rishus hayachid, and even midarabbanan it would be considered to be an enclosure according to Rav Yehuda, and you don't need any tikkun, you don't need a lachi v'kair, and that's why it's mutter under the overpass to carry under the overpass because it's completely enclosed. The case of a mavi mefulash, you only have two mechitzas. You have the two sides of the mavi; it's open on each end. There, you need a lachi and kair on each end. If you have shnei batim shnei tzidei rishus harabim, you don't have an overpass. You don't have pitikra yared v'seisim. You don't have four sides. You have two walls, which Rabbi Yehuda holds is a deraisa, and therefore we would hold that in Midaraisa, it's a Rishus HaYachid, but Midrabanan, you need a tikkun of a Lechi Kaira. And that's why you need a Lechi and Kaira at each end. So that's the Shita of Rav Yehuda. He holds Midaraisa, 2 mechitzas are sufficient. But Midrabanan, you need a tikkun of a Lechi Kaira at each open end. If you have Pitikra Yair V'Seisim, that's enclosed, even without a physical wall, it's enclosed on 4 sides, then he holds that you don't even need a tikkun. What do the Rabbanan hold? The Rabbanan hold that yes, we hold Pitikra Yair V'Seisim, but we don't hold 2 mechitzas or deraisa. In midaraisa, this is machlokes rishonim, you need at least 3 physical walls to be 3 walls to be a deraisa. So therefore, a mavi mafulish, you cannot be misakin with lechi kaira. Now, even though the Rabbanan, generally speaking, it's halach l'maish misinai pitikra yair v'seisim, but as the Rishonim speak out, and as Taisa speaks out in Masechet Sukkah, but the Rabbanan hold also Rabim mevat lemechitza, even though they hold pitikra yair v'seisim, but when you have a Rishus Rabim that goes under an overpass that walks through, we say also Rabim mevatel mechitza. They're mevatel these type of mechitza, so we don't say pitikra yair v'seisim. So therefore, the Rabbanan hold that you cannot make a carry under the overpass, and you cannot even be masakin it with a lechi v'kaira because you don't have an enclosure. You don't have a rishus hayachid. It's not considered a rishus hayachid. So they argue on 2 points. They argue, number one, on whether 2 mechitzas are deraisa. Rav Yehuda says 2 mechitzas are sufficient to create a rishus hayachid. Rabbanan say it's not. And they also argue whether you would say, even though everybody holds Pitikra Yair V'Seisim, but when the Rabbin traffic goes through this area, do we still say that Pitikra Yair V'Seisim is considered to be a Rishus HaYochid? Or do we say, no, Asiram Vatal Mechitza, it nullifies the Mechitza, and you don't have a Mechitza over here, and it's not a Rishus HaYochid over here. So the Machlokes is on both areas. Hadron Kol Gagais, Hadron Kol Gagais, Hadron Kol Gagas. Hanoitzi Tfilin, Machnisim Zug Zug.